We have made it to the draft preview here for our second draft in the Portland Trailblazers MyNBA franchise. So last episode obviously was a little bit different. We did something that I've never done in a 2K series before, and that was that we basically simulated through the entirety of the college basketball season. We went over the NCAA tournament, specifically the Final Four. We talked about how all the top prospects did. We talked about which players' stocks went up throughout the year and which guys' stocks went down. And all of those will kind of be showcased today within our draft preview. We also simulated through the playoffs. The Cavs ended up beating the Grizzlies in 6 games to win the title. So the Cleveland Cavaliers win their second championship of the decade. We're going to go through everything up until the draft today. So that includes retirements, league meetings, draft lottery, the combine, all that good stuff. So we will start with the player retirement stage here for the offseason of 2025. And there are some pretty big names on the list. And that includes arguably the greatest player to ever lace them up, the greatest player for his individual country ever, none other than Australian legend Patty Mills. But in all seriousness, LeBron James headlines the list of retirements. At 40 years old, after 22 years in the NBA, he's going to hang up the cleats with only 4 championships. He had an opportunity to get a 5th ring last year. The Lakers took the Knicks to Game 7 in the finals, and that game ended up being really close. But the Knicks obviously won the title, and LeBron retires with a 4-7 record in the finals. But other than that, LeBron James has done everything you can ask for. Statistically, by far the most impressive individual career ever. Chris Paul, Rudy Gay, Derrick Rose, Klay Thompson, John Wall, Seth Curry, and others headline the remaining list of retirements. Here's the staff retirements, only 2. Kevin Ollie, the former Pistons head coaching finalist, along with Doug Christie in Sacramento. Only 2 Hall of Famers in this class, LeBron James and Chris Paul. Obviously, very well deserved. LeBron, arguably the greatest player ever. Chris Paul, arguably a top 3 to 5 point guard ever. I'm a little bit surprised there's no Klay Thompson there, and I think you can make a case for John Wall or Kyle Lowry as well. As for jersey retirements, Paul, LeBron, Lowry, Klay, LeBron, and LeBron again. No John Wall. I feel like that's a little disrespectful. I think the Wizards should retire his number, but everything else there seems about right. As for league meetings, we do have some changes that we'll be making here. I usually like to add 1 or 2 new rules into the league every year. And for this season, we're going to do something that I do pretty much in every 2K series, and that is abolish the one and done rule and let kids straight out of high school enter the NBA draft. I think I've done this every 2K series for the last 4 years, so I'm happy to bring the tradition back. This means that next year's class should be especially loaded because we're going to have the top of 2 high school classes being 2025 and 2026. Let's move into the NBA draft lottery. We, of course, have 3 first-rounders this year, none of which are in the lottery. Going into the year, we thought we'd have probably at least 2, but every team ended up making the playoffs. The Thunder get the 14th pick, that selection from the Paul George trade 6 years ago. The Kings get pick 13 from the De'Aaron Fox trade this year. The Lakers get 12. The Raptors get 11. That means Miami moves into the top 4. The Heat with a new big-time asset. The Jazz get the 10th pick. The Raptors get the 9th pick. The Raptors back up here. They will end up with the 8th pick as well. So Toronto had 3 chances to move up, and they didn't. Still, 3 lottery picks is pretty exciting. Nets get pick 7 from the Kevin Durant trade. Bucks get pick 6 from the Giannis trade. The Rockets get pick 5 from the Russell Westbrook trade. Geez, a lot of teams were getting some of these old trades. The Pelicans get pick 4 from the Drew Holiday trade. That deal the Bucks don't regret so much. The Bulls get the 3rd pick. We're down to 2. The Heat and the Spurs. And the San Antonio Spurs get the 2nd pick, which means the Miami Heat, who were projected 11th in the draft lottery and barely missed out on a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference, end up with the number 1 pick in the draft. Damian Lillard, Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and now a new premium asset. Got to assume the Heat are going to look to shop this pick and add another star. The Spurs at 2 as well. Giannis is a free agent at the end of the year. They know they got to convince him to stay. Adding a 3rd star along with him and Wemby might be the move. So we could see some movement here with these top 2 picks. The Heat and the Spurs potentially looking to move out of their selections. We'll talk about some possible draft scenarios shortly. First, I briefly want to go over the staff signing stage. We had 3 positions to fill. That includes the CFO. We're going to go after Jordan Malone, hopefully no relations to Carl. We're going to offer Gene Baxter to be our sports psychologist, and then Kurt Isley to do physio. The 2 medical people accepted. We did not get the CFO we wanted, so we're going to have to settle for Trent Solomon instead. So now the staff is filled. We're not going to fire everybody because everybody did a pretty good job this year, including Chauncey Billups, our head coach, who could be looking at an extension pretty soon with the development of our team going quicker than I had expected. Going into this draft, we have picks 19, 22, and 29 in the first round. Along with 2 second-rounders, that's 5 total. So we may end up with a lot of rookies, but that also gives us a big opportunity to move up and down the board if there's a player projected early who we really like. I think it's a 4-player draft at the top, and you can make an argument for 4 guys to be the number 1 pick. That starts with Myron Sheridan, the guard out of Michigan State. Going into the season, Sheridan was viewed as the clear and concise top prospect in this draft, and I think his play on the floor really reflected that. Of these top 4 guys, I think he's got the most upside because his game is the most well-rounded. He's an impressive above-the-rim athlete who has shown some scoring flashes, averaging over 16 a game, albeit on fairly inefficient shooting, only 42% from the field and 33% from beyond the arc. He's a good defender, he's a good rebounder, over 7 a game, and he led the Big Ten in assists, averaging nearly 6 a night. He's a really good passer for somebody who can play on the ball and off the ball. And I think his offensive versatility is going to really lead to him being a weapon on that end of the floor. Defensively, he's really solid as well with his 6'6", 195-pound frame. I think he just checks off all the boxes. And if I was picking number 1, I think I would want the guy who's got the best chance to be a superstar. And in my opinion, that's Myron Sheridan. There are a few other candidates for this selection, including Rurik Yakovlev, the big man from Russia. He's your modern-day 4. I think his ability to stretch the floor, defend multiple positions, and pass the ball makes him really enticing. 6'11", 235 pounds. He can score at a very high level from inside the arc, and his three-point shot is a work in progress. I think that could be an asset down the line. He's a great passer as well. He's got a little work to do defensively. He can defend multiple positions, but he can't really defend any at a high level, and that's because he's just not quite as athletic and quick as some of these other great defensive forwards in this draft. So if he's able to clean up his issues with his three-point shot and his defense, I think he could be a really good player at the next level. Going into the year, we knew that Sheridan and Yakovlev would be top picks. We did not know that Troylan Battle from Arizona State would put his name in the conversation for the number 1 pick. Battle was a McDonald's All-American, so he hasn't come completely out of nowhere. But after a rough freshman season leading to him transferring to Arizona State, he had an unbelievable season as a scorer, averaging 21.6 points a game on really solid efficiency, 47% from the field, 37% from 3. He was second amongst all Power 5 players this year in scoring, and he did it on a high shooting rate. Those are not empty stats either. He led Arizona State to a spot in the Final Four. So this is a guy who's been able to impact winning basketball. Obviously, his scoring is his best asset, but I think he's got upside long-term as a playmaker and as a defensive player. But right now, his scoring is by far his biggest strength. I think Midnight Hopkins is the sleeper of this group. I think he's got the least chance of this 4 to be the number 1 pick. But I think he is good enough to be in the conversation, not just as a top 4 pick, but maybe one of those top 3 spots. Hopkins quietly had a really good season this year as a freshman with the Houston Cougars, averaging 19 and 8. His efficiency was up and down. I think his shot is a little bit inconsistent, but this is somebody who, with some development, will be a good 3-level scorer down the line. He's not really a super versatile defender. He's great on the perimeter. I don't think he quite has the strength, at least right now, to defend bigger guys down low. That could be something that comes with time, but for right now, you're probably going to want to keep him on the perimeter, guarding guards and wings. I think these 4 players all have very unique strengths and weaknesses, but regardless, I think they are the clear top 4, and then after that, who the hell knows? I think Sporting Network's rankings are a little bit off base, So we're kind of going to go out of order here. And the next few players I'm going to talk about are the guys who I think are surefire lottery picks, and there's really only 4 or 5 more. That starts with a Mel Wright out of Duke, who had a great season this year, averaging over 15 a game, helping lead Duke to a national championship where he won the NCAA's tournament and Final Four MVP, scoring 21 points in the championship on really good shooting splits against a great Texas team who had only lost 3 games all year prior to the title game. I think Wright's a really well-rounded player. He can score from all 3 levels, although the efficiency wasn't great this year. 41% from the field, 32% from 3. But when the lights shine the brightest, this guy got buckets at a high rate. I think his playmaking and defense needs a lot of work, but could be pretty solid down the line. The second of the 3 Yakovlev triplets. This is Mikhail Yakovlev, the big man. He is your traditional down-low center who is just a flat-out enforcer and bruiser. I think he's going to succeed in the modern NBA, though, because I think he can run the rim, and he's got pretty solid mobility for someone who's 7'1", 260 pounds. He's not a full-on old-school center because he can run up and down the floor at a pretty solid rate. He can score inside. He's an anchor defensively. He doesn't really have much of the game outside of the paint, but for somebody inside 15 feet on both ends, I think he's going to be very impactful. Esteban Del Real might be the best international prospect not in the Yakovlev family. Hailing from Spain, Del Real is a really versatile forward who can do a lot of different things on both ends of the floor. He's a good rebounder. He's a good defender. He can pass the ball. He can run the floor. His scoring is a little bit inconsistent for right now. He's shown the flashes there. I think inside the arc, he's going to be pretty impactful right away. As a three-point shooter, not so much. Not really somebody who's going to give you a ton of floor spacing outside of 15 to 20 feet. But I think with his shooting splits, at least inside the arc, he could be a good three-point shooter down the line. Javon Tyler from Kansas had a great season. His impact on winning is very noticeable. Tyler had a really good start to the year. He averaged 13 points and 8 rebounds on solid efficiency through Kansas's first 19 games of the year. He suffered a season-ending injury in February, and Kansas's team wasn't the same. They were ranked second in the country when he got hurt, and they were still good after the injury because Bill Self is the best coach in the country. But they were a little disappointing down the stretch. They lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament, and they just were not the same team without him. I think Tyler's all-around game is going to really entice teams, especially contenders, who are looking for more impactful players off the bench. At just 19 years old as a freshman, Tyler is one of the most impactful players in terms of all-around winning basketball in the country. He's a solid scorer, solid playmaker, and a pretty good defensive player. I think his defensive versatility could be solid down the line. He's only 187 pounds, though. He's a little bit skinny. He's not going to be able to match up well with bigs, but he still has a lot of time to grow into his body, and I think he'll be able to gain some weight as he gets older. Kalen Edwards out of Clemson is a really fascinating player. Going into the season, he looked like a probable top 3 to 4 pick, and it does not look like he's going to keep that status for more reasons than one. On the floor, he was solid. He averaged 13 and 8. He was a little bit inconsistent, though, with his efficiencies, but overall, pretty solid player. Maybe not top 5 pick level, but still pretty good. An injury he suffered in January ended his season after just 11 games. Said injury should not be an issue going forward. He'll be able to participate at workouts and whatnot. But his stock has gone down a little bit. I think he's still going to be a lottery pick. I think it's 50-50 right now on whether he ends up in the top 10. I like his skill set, though. He's a good mid-range scorer, good inside scorer. He's a good post defender, and I think he does have the quickness and versatility to eventually be a good perimeter defender, although he could use some work there right now. But I do really like his upside. Fano Marino had a very good season in the international circuit. He hails from Italy, and he's a really intriguing center. He's 7'2", 210 pounds, and I think he's sort of the next unicorn to enter the NBA, kind of in the sense of like a Victor Wembanyama or a Chet Holmgren, in the sense that this guy plays like a guard. He can handle the ball, he can create his own shot inside and outside the arc. Now, he's not as efficient or as consistent as Wemby or Chet, and he's also probably not as good defensively as those guys. But I think he has a similar skill set. He's just a little bit worse in every area across the board. Players like Wembanyama and Chet are starting to take over the NBA, and I think Fano Marino is the next on the list. And somebody's going to fall in love with him and want to take a shot on him, in my opinion, inside the top 10 picks. I think the upside with him is that tempting. I think those are the only other guys who are surefire lottery picks, and I would be surprised if they weren't picked in the lottery. Pretty much every player going forward who we talk about has a real shot to fall to the Blazers' top pick. That starts with Kahlil Griffin out of Tennessee, somebody whose draft stock really has gone up this year. He had a great freshman season with the Vols, and I think he's a guy who really fits the Portland Trail Blazers in the sense of what they are trying to build and the style of players they're looking for. Kahlil Griffin's a perfect match. Somebody who can space the floor offensively, he can hit the three ball, he's a pretty good defensive player. But what I really like about him is his toughness and his tenacity. He's a great rebounder. He averaged 8 boards a game this year with Tennessee, along with 15.6 points. He was mainly used off the bench for the Vols, but he was still arguably their most impactful player. Second on the team in minutes. He improved his shooting throughout the year, and once it came time for March, he was the best player on the team, and that really elevated the Vols, leading them to an Elite 8 berth. I don't think he falls to Portland's top pick at 19, but I do think there's a chance he slips out of the lottery. There's also a chance he goes in the top 10. I think somebody could really like his skill set. Another guy whose stock has gone up throughout the year is T.J. Porter Jr. out of Texas. Going into the season, I think a lot of teams just labeled him as a microwave scorer, as an Emmanuel Quickley, Bones Highland, if he's lucky, Jamal Crawford or Lou Williams type of player. And I think he can do that. He was a super impactful scorer, especially in the tournament. He scored 28 points in Texas's Final Four win against Michigan. But in the national championship, he was cold. He only scored 9 points. Texas ends up losing to Duke. I think his game is more than his ability to score. And yes, he's a great shot creator. He's a great three-point shooter. Shot 46% this year from beyond the arc. But I think he can create for himself and others, and he's a pretty impactful defensive player as well. I think there's a shot he could go in the lottery. There's also a decent shot he doesn't go in the lottery. Let's look at these 2 point guards, Malachi Suleiman and Dante Kingsley, both of whom I think have pretty similar skill sets. Suleiman's an interesting player because he has been mocked all over the place. He could go as high as like pick 15, and he could go as low as like the middle of the second round. His range in terms of draft slot is larger than just about anybody in this class. Suleiman's an intriguing player because I think he's the best passer in the draft. That's a big strength of his, but he's got some big weaknesses as well. He's not a very good scorer, period. Not efficient, low volume. He only scored 10 points a game, and he did it barely shooting 40% from the field, less than 30% from 3. Defensively, he's got a lot of work to do as well, but it's hard to find somebody who's got the feel for the game that he does, and he played really well in the NCAA tournament. He had a great month of March and was able to rebuild some of his draft stock back. Dante Kingsley out of Michigan has gotten a ton of love from teams throughout the pre-draft process. And since the end of the college season, I don't think there's anybody whose stock has gone higher than him. He had a really good junior season this year with the Wolverines, and he's a jack-of-all-trades type of player. He can create his own shot, had his most efficient year of his collegiate career, good passer, good defender, good rebounder as well. I think a contending team is going to really want him because he's going to be able to give you good minutes as a rookie. The problem is I don't think many contenders are going to get a chance to get him. His name has risen so quickly in terms of teams and front offices that he's got a shot to go in the top 10. That's unheard of for upperclassmen in the modern era. That's how much teams like him. There's a real shot. After we get through 10 picks, he's not on the board. Another Big Ten player who really impacts winning on a high level is Sato Cortez out of Maryland. There aren't many players in this class whose stock has gone higher throughout the year than his. Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. He's a menace on that end of the floor. He's physical. He's tough. He will contest every shot in the book, and he will make your life hell. Now, offensively, he's got a lot of work to do. He's not a great three-point shooter. Inside the arc, he's an okay scorer. His efficiency was very bleh this year. 44% from the field is fine, but only 28% from 3 and only 68% from the line. You're not drafting him for his scoring or his passing, though. You're getting him for his defense. He can guard the best player any given night, and he's going to be able to hold up just fine. Adonis Cherokee from Oregon is a player whose stock has gone down throughout the year. He didn't quite meet expectations. He didn't have that bad of a season and should still be a first-rounder. He averaged 13 and 9 this year with the Ducks, so he played pretty solid defense. but he just wasn't all that consistent, especially on the offensive end of the floor, only shooting 43% from the field, which isn't really what you want for your center and somebody who takes a majority of their shots from inside the paint. His shot selection this year was really not all that good. Now, that's something that can be fixed. He's 20 years old, and I do think he has long-term shooting upside. He has an outside shot, and I think it's gotten better throughout his basketball career. Defensively, he's got some work to do, though. This is somebody who can block shots and make plays, but he isn't a true anchor yet. So I think he's a little bit raw, but with upside, and I think he could be a good player down the line. Jacoy Toney out of Memphis is kind of in the same boat, but he was even worse this year offensively. Only averaged 9.5 points a game, and he did it on dreadful efficiency. 37% from the field, 25% from three. And it's not like he really shoots many threes to begin with. Most of his shots are inside, and for him to shoot less than 40% really is not ideal. He's a really intriguing defensive prospect, though. He's a great athlete. He's got great versatility. I think he's probably years away from being a consistent NBA rotation player, but he's one of the youngest players in the draft at just 18 years old. And once you get to the teens, you're taking swings through upside, and with his athletic frame, he is a big swing on upside. High ceiling, but very low floor. I think the opposite can be said for Ty Lavella out of Ohio State. I think when you draft him, you kind of know what you're getting. This is a very aesthetically pleasing player to watch. He's 6'7". He can handle the ball. He can create his own shot. He can score in contact. I think his overall offensive skill set could use some polish, but I really like it. I think he brings good defensive effort and versatility as well, and I think he could be a pretty good pick, most likely in the 20s, which is right around the range where the Blazers have like 3 picks. Lavella's an inconsistent shooter, but I think he could get better there down the line, and he did have some good shooting stretches throughout the year. He's not a super versatile defensive player yet. He's really good on the perimeter right now. I think if he bulks up a little bit more, he could be a pretty good interior defender down the line with his 6'7" height and his 6'11" wingspan. Teams are really going to like the size and length that he brings. Florian Albu is an intriguing foreign-born player. He comes from Romania, a talented two-guard who can do a little bit of everything. He's a pretty solid scorer from all 3 levels. I like his ability as a playmaker as well and as a defender. It's really just consistency and efficiency that needs to improve, but I think Albu could end up being a steal down the line if he's just a more consistent player. It's really that simple with him. Let's look down the board even further. These guys could fall in the second round. They could be candidates for some of Portland's late first-round picks, though. I have no idea where Dante Branch's draft stock is at. He's a really interesting player because for much of the year he was projected in the top 10, and I could see him still being a lottery pick, but I think teams are going to be a little bit concerned with the efficiency. Only shot 41% from the field, 32% from 3. It's not like he has a ton to offer as a passer, only 2 assists per game. But I think teams are really going to like his toughness and his motor. He played really well in March Madness, and he's a good fit for the Blazers, similarly to what we talked about with the Tennessee wing, Kahlil Griffin, in the sense that this guy's tough, he plays hard, he plays good defense, he's a great rebounder as well. And I think he's a better three-point shooter than his 32% is going to let on. I think he's going to be a pretty good three-point shooter in the NBA. He's got good form. His efficiency improved throughout the year. And I think if he reaches his ceiling, he's going to be the perfect 3-and-D guy who you plug in the corner, you trust to make catch-and-shoot threes, plays great defense, grabs a ton of rebounds. I don't know if he's necessarily got, like, all-star upside or anything, but this is another guy who I think is really going to impact winning basketball. Napoleon Outlaw, the French guard, is a guy whose name has really risen up over the last few months. I feel like every year we find foreign players who really don't get talked about leading up to the draft, and then their stock skyrockets over the final month or so leading up to draft day. A good recent example of this is another French player, Bilal Coulibaly, just a couple years ago. He wasn't really getting any first-round hype until maybe a month or two before the draft. Then he starts to get some lottery hype, and then on draft night he goes with the 7th pick. I don't think Outlaw is going to go 7th. Let me make that perfectly clear. But I do think he could go higher than people expect because I think teams are going to like his athletic upside. 6'4" with a 6'10" wingspan. Great size and length. Peyton Profit out of Syracuse, I think, is a pretty talented player. He had a very up-and-down freshman season with the Orange, but I think this is a guy who's going to be a better pro player than he was college player. only averaged around 11.5 points per game, and he did it on very subpar efficiency. Barely shot 42% from the field, less than 31% from three. But I think he's got upside as a scorer. He's got upside as a playmaker and as a defensive player as well. He's got work to do and probably is somebody who mostly plays in the G League next year. But I think he could be a pretty well-rounded player down the line if he can improve his efficiencies and consistencies. Ishmael Iverson Jr. is another guy whose draft stock has just completely blown away this year. Iverson was a 3-year bench player with Penn State. Coming into his senior season, it looked like his NBA dream was dead. And he was not on anybody's NBA radar, and now he's got a shot to be a first-round pick. He was one of the best players in college basketball this year. All Big Ten first team, all NCAA second team. This is a guy who really impacts winning. Once again, that's a common theme with some of the players who we really like in this class. Averaged 15 a game along with 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and he nearly did it on 50, 40, 90 shooting. He's a great point guard who I think is going to be the perfect bench player for a good team right off the bat, and he's going to give you quality minutes on both ends of the floor. With how good of a player he is right now, I'd be surprised if he wasn't a first-round pick. I think teams are really going to like him. Abdul Khalif, the big man here from Nigeria, is one of the most fascinating players in this class. He hasn't played in over a year due to a really bad knee injury that he suffered, but he appears to be fully healthy. He's ready for the combine. He will be participating. I think he's a big upside player who could be really good. Lorenzo Bates from the NBA G League's Ignite program is another guy who's got a lot of upside. He's a high-flying athlete who I think has got some work to do, but could be a really good player. For those of you who watched the Knicks series, you may remember another G Leaguer, Ra Khalif Doumbou. I think these two guys have very similar frames and similar athletic abilities. I think Doumbou was a better scorer and shot creator, but I think Lorenzo Bates could have a similar type of career as a guy who gives you high energy off the bench. Another G League player who we like is Prada Pilores, the big center, who coming into the year looked like a projected top 10 pick, and he just did not play at that level this season. He didn't look super conditioned. It seemed like that his athleticism, or I guess lack thereof, really showed at times. He kind of lacks a true motor. Kind of similar to DeAndre Ayton in a lot of ways. You can tell the talent is there. He's a good inside scorer. He's a good defensive player. But you just feel like something's missing with his game. Regardless, at just 19 years old, I think his conditioning can be worked on, and I think he's got the upside to be a pretty good player. I think some team could take him in the first round based on upside, but right now I think he's probably more than an early second-round pick, which is quite the fall from grace, considering going into the year, there was a shot he could have gone in the top 5. There are some pretty intriguing foreign players down the board here who I think probably end up in the second round, and that starts with Luchi Yakovlev, the third and final Yakovlev triplet. He's not as good of a prospect compared to his brothers because he didn't hit the genetic lottery. His twins are 6'11 and 7'1. He's only 6'5". Despite that, though, I think he has a pretty intriguing skill set, and I think he's kind of being slept on a little bit. He's one of the best passers in the entire draft. It's helpful living with NBA-level bigs your whole life. But once he's on an NBA team, he's still going to have NBA bigs who he can throw lobs to. I think he can be a pick-and-roll threat as a passer. He needs to improve as a scorer and as a defender, but I think he can, and I think the upside with him is really intriguing. Sabir Solomonov from Lebanon is another intriguing player to watch. He's a downhill, physical, bruising big man, another old-school type of player who I think has the athleticism and mobility to be a little bit more than that. Lebanon is not in the game, so it says he's from Lebanon Valley College. That's the closest thing we could get to it, but I like his scoring ability inside. Doesn't really offer a ton on the perimeter on either end of the floor, but I think he is really athletic, and that gives him a big advantage down low because I think he's going to be able to match up just fine with NBA bigs. Shakir Azukiwe from the Congo is another pretty intriguing player to watch. I really like his passing ability. That's what pops off when you watch his film. I think he's got a great feel for the game for someone who's just 19 years old, and I think there is some upside on both ends of the floor as a scorer and as a defensive player. I think with his size and length and athleticism, he is somebody who can defend the perimeter, and I think if he can improve his three-point shot, he'll be a good three-level scorer who can pass the ball and run the floor. For the second round, I think you take a shot on that type of upside. Now we look at the players who are more fringe draftable. Some of these guys might go undrafted. Some of these guys might go in the second round. I think there's a big sleeper here, and that's Zay Logan from Alabama State. So this kid has a really interesting story. 5-star recruit out of high school, McDonald's All-American. He's a really, really good prospect, but he decides to go to Alabama State, which is a little bit odd, you might think, at first glance, because they're not a traditional basketball school. Now, unfortunately for Logan, he didn't play a minute in his freshman season because of an eligibility issue, which the NCAA later deemed that they ruled incorrectly. So this kid got no playing time this year for no fault of his own, other than the fact that the NCAA is completely corrupt. The last we saw of him was the Under-19 FIBA World Cups for Team USA, where he looked pretty good. I think this kid's got a ton of talent. He had a really good senior high school season. He's played well on the AAU and international circuits prior, which is really the last time we've seen him play organized basketball. I think his stock is going to be all over the place because you got to remember he was a 5-star recruit. It's not like he had a bad season on the floor per se. It's just that we haven't seen him play organized basketball in nearly a year. So because of that, I think some team could pick him as high as the late first round. But because there's a lot of unknown with him, he's currently projected as a second rounder. There are some intriguing potential undrafted players as well, possibly some guys who you look to give a two-way deal to, and players who could have intriguing long-term upside, even if we don't really see it yet. Let's take a look at the 3 mock drafts. And again, keep in mind we have 5 picks currently, 19, 22, and 29 in the first round, along with 9 and 21 in the second round. Chances are we're not going to end up with those 5 picks. We may move up, we may move down, we may trade for a veteran player. We've got a ton of flexibility with all these selections. Realistically, we're probably not going to end up with 5 rookies on the roster because that's like a third of the team. So let's take a look at the 3 mock drafts. All 3 of them are very different, which is why I'm excited to compare them. We'll start with the sporting news. They've got Rurik Yakovlev going number 1, and the big surprise is that his twin, Mikhail Yakovlev, goes at pick 3, with Troyland Battle slipping to the 6th pick in the draft. That would really surprise me. I don't see that one coming. As for us, they have us selecting Kyron Zilton out of Michigan at pick 19 as a big wing. We didn't talk about him, but he's a pretty intriguing player. They've also got us going with Peyton Profit out of Syracuse. We talked about him. I like him quite a bit. Along with guard Noah Smith. As for the second round, they have us doubling down on guards with the other Yakovlev triplet, along with Booker Bennett. If we draft 3 point guards and no centers, I have a feeling you guys are going to flip on me, and honestly, rightfully so. 2K has Yakovlev going number 1. They have Hopkins at 2, followed by Battle and then Sheridan. They got the top 4 right, but I don't know if that's going to be the order, per se. I'd be surprised if it ends up like that. As for us, they have us selecting Kalen Edwards at pick 19, Ty Lavella at 22, and Ishmael Iverson at 29. That would be an awesome first round. Those 3 picks are all very good value selections. And then they've got us going with Kyron Zilton and Archie Lacey in the second round. I think this draft would be a great one for us. As for NBA.com, they have Midnight Hopkins going number 1. So none of the mock drafts have Battle or Sheridan with the top pick. But I wouldn't take it too much into account because there's a good shot the Heat don't end up picking number 1 overall to begin with. The big surprise here would be Kahlil Griffin at pick 5. I think all 3 mock drafts have Griffin going in the top 10. I could see him going in the lottery. I think there's a good shot he falls out as well, but maybe teams are higher on him than I expect. They've got us going with Ishmael Iverson at 19, Peyton Profit at 22, and Booker Bennett at 29. All 3 guys who we've already picked in another mock draft. As for the second round, they have us going with Moyo Adebayo out of Pitt. He's a senior. And then the Yakovlev triplet at pick 51. So none of the mock drafts had us getting a traditional big, which is kind of funny because I think a lot of people would say that's probably our biggest need, considering once DeAndre Ayton got hurt, we were running Ben Simmons as our starting center in the playoffs, which is not ideal. Let's take a look at the NBA Draft Combine. Some very interesting results here and a few players who I want to dive into in specific. Shakir Azukiwe, the athletic forward from the Congo. I thought he had a really good showing at the Combine. Lorenzo Bates was pretty solid as well. I think his numbers were a little bit disappointing, but still pretty good. Adonis Cherokee had a pretty solid showing, shot the ball pretty well. Kalen Edwards, I thought, tested quite well. Kahlil Griffin was phenomenal, 42-inch vertical. Midnight Hopkins performed really well, as did Ishmael Iverson. Zay Logan, the wild card of this year's draft, had a great showing, shot the ball super well. Another guy who I thought did pretty good was Peyton Profit out of Syracuse. He shot the ball very well, too. Myron Sheridan was great. Javon Tyler from Kansas was also really impressive. 2 guys who I wanted to see more from were Malachi Suleiman and Jacoy Toney, 2 guys who had rough seasons. I would have liked to have seen them perform better. I thought they were both pretty subpar. The two Yakovlev triplets who were projected early participated in the combine, whereas the one projected to go in the second round didn't, which is a little bit of a surprise. Of the top 4 projected picks, 3 of them did participate, with Troyland Battle being the only guy who didn't. Realistically, we're not going to move up into the top 4, but we could move into the lottery. So because of that, I wanted to invite some guys who could be lottery picks for our pre-draft workouts. Cortez, Marino, Tyler, Mikhail Yakovlev, Edwards, and Griffin all got pre-draft invites along with Prada Pilores, Dante Branch, Zay Logan, Abdul Khalif, and Ishmael Iverson Jr. Those last few guys are players who I think will fall in the range of our top pick and our first, second round pick, but I also want to leave open the idea of trading up. Looking at the final results, I think there's 3 or 4 guys here who really stood out to me in a positive way. Ishmael Iverson Jr. continues to do everything right. His stock continues to grow. We don't really need guards, but I think he'd be a great fit. Kahlil Griffin is another guy whose stock has really gone up over the last year. Good showing at the combine. He performed really well in our pre-draft workout. Fano Marino, I think, is a guy who a lot of people are going to like and going to want us to pick because he's a really fun player who I think would be an intriguing fit. He had a very good showing. And then Zay Logan, I thought, performed really well too, and he could be an interesting flyer in the second round, or maybe even with our last first round pick. Let me know what you guys think we should do down below in the comments for this year's draft. Really fun class. I'm excited to see all of these guys get drafted in the NBA. Should we move up? Should we move down? Should we stand pat? Should we trade our picks for a proven veteran? We've got a lot of options, and I want to hear what you guys think we should do down below. The plan is for the NBA draft episode to be premiered this Sunday. Time is to be determined. I will have a community post and probably an announcement in the Discord server. You should join that if you're not in there, as I get an official time over the next couple of days. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.